I am Richard Cutland. I am the military specialist for Wargaming Europe. So my background was British Army. I was in the British Army for 30 years in the Royal Tank Regiment. So, and obviously initially brought on board with Wargaming to work with World of Tanks. No mention of ships in those days. No mention of ships at all. So initially, as I said, I was still serving in the army when they approached me about World of Tanks, and they were saying basically we're after somebody to come and talk to the community. That really was the basis of the job to start with, about what it's like. You know, I've been on operations a few places. I just come back from Afghanistan at that stage, and they had this conversation. They said, you know, this is what we want. I said, who are you? And they went, Wargaming, never heard of you. Do you play games? Yeah, love PlayStation. No, PC games. No, don't play PC games. So, you know, it was going well. I thought this stage of the interview, and my wife was saying it was about time you got a real job. So that's really how the sort of World Tanks thing grew. And then obviously, sort of, you know, it was probably 18 months, a couple of years ago now, when, you know, there was talk of World of Warships and this sort of thing. And fortunately, from, you know, my part of that, as you know, I work with a lot of divisions like marketing and PR and this sort of thing as well. But from the development point of view, a lot of the stuff my team do is the research, is the blueprints, is the finding the information. I always say that we've got what I think is probably the easiest part of the job, because we get all the real stuff and give it to the development side, and then they have to virtually recreate this, you know, this ship in this case in game. Now, so obviously when we started to go across the ships, it was lucky because by that stage we've built up such a network of, you know, archives and people, and very much in the historical world, it's more of, you know, who you know as opposed to what you know. So, you know, Richard Smith, the director of the Tank Museum, knew the director of Chatham Dockyard, for example. So we had a lot of people straight away we could talk to start to gather this information. So really, that's, you know, how we started to get into the ships. And then they started talking about making videos of ships. I was like, seriously, ships? Really? They're just big. It was, and I'll be totally honest with you. I mean, obviously, initially, I was quite sceptical because, you know, talking, you know, seriously for a minute or two. You know, I've lost friends in sort of Iraq and Afghanistan and that sort of thing. So I was always. It wasn't as, I mean, I've got a teenage son, so obviously I've seen many first-person shooters and all these sort of things, and I will not go into that discussion about that sort of thing, but I was a little bit sceptical. I couldn't really see where this transition was, but I said, when I got to know the company, and this was really why I was happy to come and work with them, was because I do feel Wargaming is, I'm very lucky for my job, so we give a lot back to what we get. So all of these things, and very much my job is working with these organisations, these museums, some of the charities we work with, and sort of promoting history. And that was the bit I liked. And I certainly, my degree was in history, and when I was in the army, we used to teach history at schools, usually in inner city London, a bit tricky. And you found quickly that it's great, the way to interact with, you know, certainly a certain generation, to make them interested, was with things like, you know, World of Tanks and get the gaming world. And as soon as you've got a hook on somebody, then you can sort of progress it and build on it a bit more. So, yeah, the answer to your question was I was a little bit sceptical, purely because I didn't really quite understand about what I think it involved, what it entailed.
Well, gaming's changed a lot in the last 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Nobody really looks at a huge audience for you to be able to educate.
Yeah, massively, and we found certainly, you know, for the company, and as I said, I'm quite lucky that really that is the part of it I'm much more concerned with the special projects, with the restorations, with the renovations, with the, you know, the educational side of it. I think it's fascinating to see that, you know, you've now opened up this you know, this world of history to a whole new diverse section of people that perhaps, I always use the example of my son. My son, bless him, he'll kill me if he ever sees this, but was not the brightest at school. He's not at university, so that doesn't say a lot for university, does it? But he hated certain subjects. But again, for him, it was, as soon as he became interested, he started playing World of Tanks. History, he was awful at, and I always had this love for history somehow, but I could not get him interested in history. But as soon as he got interested in the game and playing the game, he then got a bit more interested in about, oh, you know, it's Tiger 1, and where was Tiger 1, and what battles did it, you know, go in? And it was somewhere just to get that bit more interest than you get sometimes by sitting in a classroom and, you know, Battle of Hastings, 1066, blah, 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 blah. So I think that's where it is. And a lot of the museums, you know, I always use Bovington perhaps as an example, but they were one of the first to sort of suddenly realise that the days of a museum being a place where it's like a library and you walk around and you're not allowed to touch anything and you look at it and that's it. are long gone. If you want to attract new audiences, and everybody needs revenue, and they need money to preserve their vehicles and the rest of it, you have to appeal to a whole new audience. And they were, when they started working with us, very quickly they were like, this is really big. You have a lot of people who are interested in tanks. We are a tank museum. It seems crazy that we've never worked together and never done this before. So, and I think we go down sometimes and sort of go around with the school trips, and you can see, for me, what a dream school trip you're looking at. Certainly for boys, I'm not so sure about the girls, but going to look at tanks, but it makes life much more interesting. And I think they were quick to realise that. So opening up to a new audience, yeah. I think, and most soldiers, I think, regardless of where you did or what you did, it's the fact that everybody makes friends, but I think in something like that, and we're talking about a tank crew, I've worked with, my crew in the last Gulf War, for example, you live and you breathe with these people, and I thank God you get on with them, because otherwise I don't know what you do. But you trust them with your life ultimately at the end of the day, and I think that's probably, since I left the army, it's something which, yes, you have friends and but I'm not sure you'd ever get that same sort of. You're all in a very intense situation, and don't get me wrong, 99.9% of the time you are bored. You are bored out of your mind, and you're doing nothing. But it's that 1% of sort of the adrenaline time, and to think that you can trust these people. So much, and I'm fortunate, and I think because I think it's more of a, it's very much a British thing, that I still think we have a lot of this inbuilt. We're very proud people, we're very proud of our country, and we're very proud of our legacy, and I think you're quite proud to do something like that. Funnily enough, I had this conversation with my son about, I think like most boys, I think about joining the army. The conversation was a little bit different. I was like, you're not joining the army, you're not doing this. And I thought, I can't say that. It's so wrong of me to say that, purely because I was worried. And, let's face it, I joined when I was 16, the army. And it was a lot different then. We used to spend most of our time drunk. Don't put that down. We used to spend, not 16. We used to spend most of the time sort of adventure training and playing football and doing sports and things. And because the world, even then, we're only looking, 35, 36 years ago, was a different place. The first thing kicked off really was, Northern Ireland was my first operational tour where I really got a sense for, and that was nothing to do with tanks. Obviously, we were walking the streets of Belfast and that. My first taste of, this job is not really like all it's cracked out to be, is it? But then, since then, obviously, we've had this massive influx of terrorism. We've had, we had Iraq, we had the Gulf War, the Falklands, Bosnia, Kosovo, Sierra Leone, all of these conflicts, and obviously taken it up to Afghanistan, which, a lot of, the guys I'm still friendly with are still serving, tour after tour after tour after tour after tour. And it got to the stage where, it actually became a really hard job in the army, whereas before it was great. It was like this old boys network. We just used to mess around with guns and tanks and things. It was great. It was fantastic. It is fun. Everybody seems to say it's about tanks. It's it is fun. But when you have to appreciate in the sort of tank regiment, it's the lowest of the low job. Really, it's your first job in the tank regiment. It's the driver, because it doesn't take the brains of an archbishop to drive a tank. Oh yes, yeah. As I said, luckily, and it would be unfair of me. I'm very lucky. I give them the information, and I give them the blueprints or the black and whites or the rest of it. It's obviously when you're starting to, as we have with World Tanks, go into this more diverse vehicles, slightly off par. And as I said, I will never ever. I totally understand. I can see both people's point of view. I can see. The developer's point of view, you've got to have it. But, when you talk about a ship, some of these aircraft carriers, took an hour and a half to manoeuvre. Doesn't make for great gameplay. You have to have a fine line between the two. But yeah, we still do get it with tanks, obviously, that somebody's noticed something, God bless them. At the end of the day, it's, what a passionate community we've got to notice something like that. And to be fair, we do, yeah. If we hear it, we look at it and go, yeah, he's right, absolutely.